Say a few words, acknowledge the committee, and then swing it your way.
That's fine.
Ken, just let me know when we start.
Okay, Sheree will let us know when we're live.
We are live.
Thank you. First, I just want to call this meeting to order with the Public Transit Safety and Transportation and Environment Subcommittee, joined with the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee. My name is Corey McCray, Chair for the PSTE Subcommittee and also Senator in the 45th Legislative District. At this moment, I would just like to take the time to acknowledge my senators who we are joined by. I see Senator Sailing, I see Senator George Edwards, and we will be joined momentarily by Senator Peters. And at this moment, I see Senator Peters is right here in my left-hand side from the Zoom. At this time, I would just like to also acknowledge Chairman Haynes from the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee.
Thank you very much, Chairman McCray. Delegate Keith Haynes, Chair of Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee on Appropriations. This full subcommittee is present. I see we have Vice Chair Proctor, along with Delegates Asa Vera and McKay. And so Chairman McCray, in our fashion of alternating these joint hearings, we turn it back over to you to begin this afternoon's hearings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to belabor the point. We'll jump right into the agency reports. And at this moment, if we could just bring up our policy analysis, Jason Kramer, to give us the report on uninsured employers fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will share my screen here in 1 second and we'll get it going. All right. My name is Jason Kramer and I'll be presenting the analysis for the Uninsured Employers Fund. The fund compensates injured workers whose employers are not insured and is funded by typically funded by a 2% assessment on workers' compensation claims. The chart on page 1 of the analysis shows a huge increase in funding for fiscal 2022. However, this doesn't accurately reflect expenses for a contract that were not budgeted properly in fiscal years 20 or 2021. And I'll discuss that in more detail in just a moment. Moving on to Exhibit 1. This exhibit shows the agency spending breakdown. $3.3 million or 62% of UEF's operating budget allowance in fiscal 22 is for a contract with Corvell, a third-party administrator to manage UEF's claims. This is a relatively new contract and has tripled UEF's agency's budget compared to just 5 years ago. And I would note that operating expenditures will represent approximately 40 to 45% of total spending from the fund in fiscal 2022 compared to only 11% in fiscal 2016. Exhibit 2 shows the changes in the fiscal 2022 allowance compared to fiscal 2021. Outside of that large change to properly budget the third-party administrator contract, the budget changes very little. I'll move on quickly next to personnel data. The exhibit here shows the agency's personnel counts of UEF's 13 positions in the fiscal 2022 allowance. 4 are vacant currently, and 2 of those have been vacant since 2015. Moving on to the first key observation, Pinnacle Actuarial Resources performed an actuarial study of the uninsured employers fund to determine unpaid liabilities at the UEF and estimated approximately $115.8 million in unpaid liabilities at the close of fiscal 2020 compared to a closing fund balance of about $6.3 million. And then I'll bounce down to Exhibit 3 here. The blue line on this chart shows the under current law, the estimated balance annually through fiscal 2030. These are estimates by the Pinnacle actuarial study that was provided. The blue line is current law, and under these estimates, the fund would be insolvent by fiscal 2029. This is later than was projected last year and in earlier estimates by DLS for a couple of reasons. One is that revenues were increased for fiscal 2021 by Chapter 495 of 2020, which increased UEF's assessment by 1 percentage point for fiscal 2021 only. There are also lower expenditures for the TPEA contract than were estimated, and there were lower benefit payments than anticipated due to a period of reduced additions of additional liabilities in the past. The green line shows what would have happened what would have the estimates have been without action taken last session. And the red line shows what would happen with a sunset extension of the increased assessment for an additional year as proposed in House Bill 876. Under all scenarios, as you can see, however, expenses exceed revenue at the standard assessment rate of their assessment level of 2% of workers' compensation claims. Moving next to staffing needs, the JCR report requested by the budget committees last session requested the actuarial study, which I just summarized, a discussion of the need for the third-party administrator contract, which was summarized in the report, and that's shown here in these bullets. The third-party administrator contract provides several benefits to UEF, as shown here. However, the third item that was requested of the study was a analysis of personnel needs of the UEF, and the report does not provide an adequate analysis of personnel needs at the agency. The second key observation in this analysis, in prior years, DLS has noted and told the committees of failures to comply with legislative directives, such as not addressing repeat audit findings, spending millions of dollars on the third-party administrator contract without budgetary authority, and continuing to struggle. And I would then also note that UEF continues to struggle with some budgetary functions. A fiscal 2020 amendment did not properly assign funds for the third-party administrator contract, so it was not properly recorded. Fiscal 2021 third-party administrator costs are not budgeted, but an amendment may be pending, according to DBM. And fiscal 2022 funds are budgeted for the third-party administrator contract, but in the wrong object. They're budgeted under contractual personnel rather than contract costs. So in light of these issues and the failure to adequately assess personnel needs by both UEF and DBM, DLS is recommending language to withhold funding at UEF, DBM, SI, the Subsequent Injury Fund, and Workers' Compensation Commission, two other workers' compensation related agencies, pending a report recommending the feasibility of restructuring involving workers' compensation related agencies, or if that's not feasible, a thorough evaluation of UEF's personnel needs. And that language is shown here. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Are there any questions from any respective senators? If you could just push the raise hand feature if you have questions. Mr. Chair, I see no questions from any senators. I wanted to see if it's any questions from any members of the House of Delegates.
I see no questions at this time from the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Kramer. At this moment, I'd like to bring Director Michael Burns and his team to give us the agency's response to the analyst report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everyone hear me, I hope? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, yes, we hear you.
Oh, good. Good. I'm sorry. I'm a lawyer, not a technician. It's a pleasure to be in front of both committees at one time, a unique experience for me. When I was in the legislature, we actually met in person, but change is often a good thing and necessity makes it even better. The agency has submitted detailed testimony in response to the analyst's report. I hesitate to spend a great deal of your time going over written responses. I think it would be better if I would add a little to it. One thing I do wish to emphasize to everyone is the nature of the coronavirus pandemic effect on this agency, which I imagine is similar to an effect that you have heard and will hear many times from other agencies. Pursuant to the legislation last year, raising the assessment for a one-year period by 1%, the agency's amount collected in assessments should be a total of about 4 million additional in this fiscal year. As of the end of December, the agency not only had not seen an increase in assessment revenue, we'd seen a decrease in assessment revenue by $1.1 million in spite of the increase of the assessment. Clearly, that's a result of the pandemic. Clearly, going forward, that is going to be a substantial impact on this agency. I cannot begin to predict where this is going to end up. But I will tell you, as long as conditions are where they are today, this agency is going to take a significant hit from it. Hence, the introduction of House Bill 876, which is to extend the sunset for 1 year to give the agency a chance to actually see what the result of that would be. One of the reasons for that legislation, both in the last session and this session, is to give you all the opportunity and this agency the opportunity to look at the situation fiscally of the agency Mr. Kramer has talked about and to decide if there are requirements for increasing revenue. This agency is 100% self-funded. This agency does not receive general funding. This agency pays for itself. And frankly, the amount of revenue coming in reflects conditions from 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. Now, on the other hand, as Mr. Kramer also mentioned, our ability to collect monies owed is vastly improved from 4 years ago, the first time I appeared before these committees as the director of this agency. That is because of our work here. I will give you just one example of that. 4 years ago when I appeared here, we did not collect any money from payment agreements. One of the many, many unfortunate and frankly astounding things I discovered was that collections was basically non-existent when I came here. I can report to you all today, I just saw the preliminary January revenue. We have collected $475,000 from payment plans. That's an increase from nothing 4 years ago. The best thing about payment plans is the money comes in every month. As we get, and we have many more in the pipeline. As we get more and more payment plans, we will receive more and more revenue on an ongoing basis. This will definitely impact the fund and its feasibility and solvency. But I cannot tell you sitting here today where we're going to be in 6 months, let alone 6 years. It's not possible. And it would not be right for me to pretend I could. As to our staffing, I wrote the report you received from this agency. I believe it to be a complete and succinct status report on this agency. I'm not going to go over the details of it again, but we had plans a year ago to hire 4 new staff people. Well, the pandemic stopped that. It just stopped it cold. I'm in the process now of more than beginning, to hire those. 2 of them will be in collections, 2 will be in the fiscal area. Mr. Kramer's touched on that, the need for it to improve. We will have 3 state employees instead of 1 handling our fiscal area, hopefully in several months, depending on the pandemic and how things work out. A year from now, when I come before you, I hope to have only 1 position left to fill. And frankly, if the pandemic shutdown stops, I would hope to have had that filled as well. So I can certainly do yet another, which would be the 3rd time in 4 years I've done a staffing report for you. I'll be happy to do another one for the next session. I am frankly bewildered and at a loss what the subsequent injury fund and the Workers' Compensation Commission have to do with any of these issues. I would strongly urge all the members to read my response as to the history of the involvement of the subsequent injury fund and the uninsured employers fund, which was found to be by the Office of Legislative Audits in the last decade and in their first audit 2011 of this decade to be an unworkable and possibly conflict of interest situation between the SIF and the UEF having joint activities. In a nutshell, neither the Workers' Compensation Commission nor the Subsequent Injury Fund has anything to do with what we do. And the attempts in past years to find some kind of way to have the SIF and the UEF do joint functioning were, as both the audits, and I would reference the 2009, 2011 audits of the Office of Legislative Audits to your attention, and the actions of the prior administration. Governor O'Malley's Department of Budget and Management found this situation and idea to be unworkable. And at the urging of Governor, actually, I suppose the order of Governor O'Malley's Department of Budget Management, the two agencies separated their functioning. I think based on this history and also the concerns I have as an attorney, as a former judge, about the notion of both the SIF and or the UEF having some kind of management over top of us by the Workers' Compensation Commission, we're all, UEF and the SIF, are litigants before the Workers' Compensation Commission. It is, from an ethical point of view, extremely dubious to have the WCC have any involvement with our management, because they would be dealing in cases with litigants who they also managed, which in my mind is clearly creates an appearance of impropriety. So again, I say I found out about the SIF and the WCC being involved in this when you all did last Tuesday. I had not heard any plan for it. What you see in my testimony is based on 48 hours of research. It is from every angle in our history, from our past and from our progress, there is no need, in this agency's humble opinion, for either the SIF or the WCC to try to manage each other with this agency. That's certainly your decision, and we will do whatever you suggest. Otherwise, and I really am proud of this, and you really ought to read it because I really am proud of it. As you can see from my report, this agency is functioning fine right now. And frankly, although it would not be an ideal situation, this agency can remote function as long as you need us to. And the details are in my report. That's because of the staff here. That's because of the work we've done over the past 4 years. And I think that speaks volumes as to our ability to function as an agency. If we, like everybody else, had to drop everything we were doing and in a couple of weeks go remote and have done it so successfully, I think that's evidence of an agency that functions well. That's evidence of an agency going forward that can function better, and hopefully an agency that, as it collects more funds, can take care of this issue of the ongoing concern about the viability of the fund. It really is a pleasure to get to talk to the legislature again. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Thank you. At this moment, I'm going to open it up with questions. And Director Burns, just for clarity, how long have you served in this position?
Since November of 2016, the Hogan administration asked me to come over and deal with this. I was an administrative law judge at that point. And so it's been a little over 4 years.
And Director Burns, I asked the question because I know that you had 4 vacancies. 2 of them was acknowledged in the analyst report that 2 of them have been vacant since 5 years. I saw that you brought up in reference to Corona in the most previous year, but what happened the previous 3 years where you couldn't fill these 2?
Well, when I got here, Mr. Chairman, I was the 4th or 5th state employee. We had 3 attorney generals, no contract with an entity with which we were working as a third-party claims administrator. One of the many issues was the fact that we had no contract and they really couldn't do the job effectively, which is no knock on them. Since then, we have hired 2 new attorney generals. We've, of course, engaged for the first time in an RFP process to obtain a third-party claims administrator after an emergency procurement to obtain a third-party claims administrator to the Corval Corporation. If you read my report submitted in December in response to last year's budget language, it will detail the success that has been and how much money that has saved us. In a nutshell, I will tell you all, my contract with Corval makes me money. They save us so much money that by hiring them effectively, it doesn't cost me to have them. I save money by having them. The other staff positions were a function of the fact, and it still is to some extent, but now I have a new actuarial study. Under the prior actuarial study, the agency was scheduled to be fiscally insolvent in 2024. So to hire new staff in light of that, our decision was, since it was not a top priority, rather than load up on state employees and expenses, the thing to do was get everything else fixed and see, and then get another actuarial study. Some of you were around, some of you weren't 4 years ago, but I will tell you that the legislature has been justifiably asking repeatedly over the years for a new actuarial study, but we couldn't get an actuarial study until we had claims information that was legit, and we didn't have it until we had Corval. But now we do. And now the study says, with an increase in the assessment for 1 year, as we've proposed in House Bill 876, it will be into the 2030s before we have an issue of insolvency. Without it, it will be in 2030-ish when the agency becomes technically insolvent in my mind. However, again, I think we're at a point now where we can afford to, and I'm not happy about the results with the budgeting. I get it. I do. But I can't fight battles everywhere, and I can't just throw money at it because we're self-funded. It's not a general fund agency. I can't afford to put us in an ongoing position of added debt until I know we can afford it. And we are now. We're ready. I want to hire a fiscal technician 1 and 2. We're going to hire 2 new contractuals to do collections, one of whom I think hopefully will come over from a temp position we have. And she is the one who has been responsible for us collecting $475,000 in 6 months. So I think going forward on these positions, I want to hire a paralegal. We have a temp who does paralegal work now. I want to hire a paralegal full-time as a state employee, and that may do it. I'm not sure yet. I need to see, I got to get them in here, see how the revenue is, see what the expenses are, and see how they do. But I think we may be getting to the point where I can return pins to the legislature, even though this is a self-funded agency, but I'm not there yet. So hopefully a year from now, perhaps I can make that, decision based on facts, and the legislature can react accordingly.
Thank you, Director Burns. So you're acknowledging, while we haven't figured it out in the 4 years, that you did feel confident to figure it out this year. Vacancies that's been vacant for the last 5 years.
Sure.
What I heard. Thank you. The second question in reference to, we just had a hearing with the subsequent injury fund, and they presented some challenges. I know that they were working with the uninsured employers fund in reference to it. And I see you all have a departmental bill within the House of Delegates at this moment, but the subsequent insurance fund also acknowledged that they have funding challenges and had some reservations about committing another year in reference to dollars that traditionally go to their respective agency. So could you just speak to that, or isn't that so?
Oh, no, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you look at the history of the subsequent injury fund, they have continually, up until the pandemic, by a year by year basis, their fund balance has gone up. And if you look at as I have, if you review their audit reports, their liability amount has gone down. I'm no expert about this, and I really haven't tried to deep dive into it, but there are some indications that because of the 1993 Americans with Disability Act, the subsequent injury fund doesn't have as many cases as they used to, because injured workers are not discriminated against. They are, because of the ADA, getting back into the workforce. Now, honest to God, I don't understand it enough to go any further, and I'll just say that. However, I will point out that their fund balance has continually gone up over the years until the pandemic. to the point where it has reached over $100 million. And a 1% 1-year assessment generates for both agencies in a normal year about $4 million. So we would have to take $4 million a year for 20 or 30 years to really cause the subsequent injury fund any serious impact. To be blunt, $4 million ain't going to kill them. It's not.
Well,
Whereas my agency we've got a $6.5 million fund balance.
I hear you, Director Burns, but let me be clear, the subsequent injury fund also came before us and presented
Right.
changes, just like every other agency with COVID experience, and had reservations in reference to the departmental bill. So I just wanted to make clear in that. And it sounds like you're also agreeing, but you may believe you have a better use of those dollars. We'll figure that out. The last question I have is in reference to, you stated some critical statements in reference to, I guess, the DLS analyst report about the recommendation for you all as agencies to be able to work together to do an evaluation is how I foresee it. So I don't look at it as any type of final determination. I think that we see a problem that exists and trying to figure out how to work with the respective administration and the agencies to come to some form of a resolution with the challenging budgets here. But you seem to put it a different way. But would you say that this is an evaluation versus a final recommendation or some type of finality in reference to this report that they're asking for?
Well, to be honest, Mr. Chairman, based on what I've read in the audit reports and the history, I'm not quite sure what we can study, to be honest with you. And I am, as an attorney, former legislator, former judge, I am extremely concerned about the notion that litigants before the Workers' Compensation Commission will have some kind of business economic overseeing role from the Workers' Compensation Commission. I can tell you, if I had a client, and I know at least one of the participants has done extensive workers' compensation work, if I had a case with the Workers' Compensation Commission and under any kind of scenario where they were managing anything for the SIF or the UEF, and the SIF and the UEF were parties, I would raise serious concerns at the hearing about a conflict of interest and the need for the WCC, frankly, to recuse itself and get somebody else to do the hearing. I don't think that makes any sense, especially in light of, and again, I would urge everyone to go back and read the audit reports and consider the Department of Budget and Management back in 2010 said this doesn't work. This doesn't work. You've got to separate. And I think, and I put it into the report I've done, I get along very well with Ed Dodd, who heads the SIF, and they've done an outstanding job. But their outstanding job can be traced to the separation from the UEF when they were trying to do things that weren't their function, and they don't have to do them. If you're talking about some kind of shared services for personnel, we do that with DBM now. And I think, frankly, you want to have a savings. If you could get DBM to do more personnel work for all agencies, let alone just the SIF, the WCC, and the UEF, I think since they're experts at it, they perhaps could do it better, faster, cheaper. But that's just but I have worked for shared services for 4 years, and I think that there's a lot to be said for that. I think it's an economic move, and I'd be happy to. But to be honest with you, I've thought about it in the last 6 days because, as I pointed out, it's the first time I heard about this idea. And I'd be happy to spend the interim looking at it. I just don't know what we can find for you. And I just don't, I'm not the SIF. I'm not the Workers' Compensation Commission. They perhaps have a different view. And if they do, they do. But I really don't see what the point is of it.
Director Burns,
Yes.
we hear you loud and clear. And as stated, it's the solvency of agencies, and all of the agencies are very important to the respective legislature.
Sure.
I know you said that you had taken 48 hours and then you shifted to about 6 days, but this will give you 6 months to have the opportunity to study, make sure that we can prepare for the solvency of the respective agencies. I'm going to see if any of my colleagues, if they can use the reactions buttons to raise hands if they have any questions, move on. And Chairman Haynes, I don't see any questions at this moment from the respective senators. I just want to see if there's any House of Delegates members that have.
No question from the PSA Subcommittee, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. At this time, it looked like there are a couple of witnesses for this respective agency. And I would like to bring up, and so Director Burns, just thank you for your comments. I'm going to move towards the witnesses at
Yes,
this
sir.
moment. Director Allman, I believe that you also wanted to comment, and you signed up as a witness to this for oral test, well, oral and written. If you got 2 minutes, and I believe that it is Cherie or Ken that would be keeping the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am happy just to add to a rather significant piece of written testimony that we submitted. I'm not going to revisit all of those points, but I'd like to highlight what Director Burns said is that we have a really strong concern about a conflict of interest. 30 years ago, the General Assembly made the very wise decision to separate the Workers' Comp Commission, the SIF, and the UEF because of the serious questions about our responsibilities as lawyers under the under the Maryland rules. The subsequent separation of us all into 3 independent agencies, I think, has been very, very smart and worked out well. I am very concerned about, as Director Burns said, about the appearance of a conflict of interest because the SIF and the UEF appear before us as litigants. We need to try to maintain the utmost in impartiality, even from an appearance perspective. So we would greatly oppose any involvement in the Workers' Compensation Commission in this. I'd also just like to point out that we became aware of this accidentally we had our hearing 11 days ago before this very committee, and we didn't have any indication that this was going to be coming up at all. And all of a sudden we find out that there's a $100,000 limitation. And it's like, my gosh, what did we do wrong? It seems punitive. I know that's not what was intended, but it seems punitive. And we think that we're doing an excellent job. We think that our work, quite frankly, has been recognized even nationally by workers' comp experts. And I think that the WCC's involvement in this, as recommended in the DLS report, is extremely ill-advised.
Thank you, Director Allman. And before I start with my questions, let me be clear. I do think that you run a very tight ship and always do extraordinary services with your respective agency. I think that the challenge is that DLS, the legislature, looks at the solvency of the UEF and how we're moving monies from the SIF to help with the solvency of the UEF. And all that they're asking for is an evaluation, a conversation. While you all can have it and you could put what you're saying in the respective report, it has always been acknowledged, but this is a real issue and we have to come up. We know what the problem is and everybody knows what the problem is in reference to the solvency, but we also have a responsibility to look at each and every opportunity that may present itself, Director Allman, and evaluation is or some form of a report from the respective agencies. And when you stated decades ago when these agencies were split, things change. There may be opportunities to work together in some capacity, and they may not be opportunities. But I think that we, as the legislature, have a responsibility to do our due diligence by that. If you could speak to that, that would be very helpful, Director Allman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think that one of the key elements that's been missed in this is that the UEF has a board that's really charged with overseeing their operation. When Director Pitts some years ago at the UEF passed away tragically and unexpectedly, we were right there to lend support. We let our chief executive officer take a leave of absence from us to go over to the UEF and become the interim director there after that tragic loss. So we do have a history of trying to help in whatever way that we can, but at the same time maintaining that very important separation that we must, as lawyers, follow. It's really a critical component, and I'm quite frankly a little bit concerned about not just litigants seeing this, but the bar counsel looking at this and potentially filing charges against a lawyer at the commission or one of these agencies that we're violating our fiduciary and attorney responsibilities.
Thank you. At this moment, I'm going to see if there are any questions from any of the senators. Seeing no hands, no reactions. Chairman Haynes, just seeing if it's any questions of the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee.
Doesn't appear to be any, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you again, Director Allman. And like I said, I can't say enough in reference to what I believe you're doing with the agency. And just wanted to thank you again for your leadership. Director Burns, I look forward to further conversation around the agency report, and policy analyst Kramer. Just thank you as always for your service to Marylanders. As this ends the hearing on Unemployment Employers Fund, I would like to move on to the respective agency, Maryland Emergency Medical Systems Operations Fund, and we're going to go to our policy analysis. Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the fiscal 2022 projection of the Maryland Emergency Medical Systems Operating Fund. We're going to jump right in and look at how the 2022 allowance is being expended from the fund. This shows the breakdown by the 5 entities which receive funding through the MEMSOF fund. Biggest chunk here is MSPAC at 45%, followed by MIMS at 21%. And you also have the AMOS fund, which is annually budgeted at $15 million, MIFRI at 11%, and shock trauma at 4%. When we look at the allowance change over the past 3 years, we can see that expenditures rise by a little less than $1 million in fiscal 2022. This is mainly driven by MSPAC here. It's a $1.8 million increase. This is largely driven by Celiola negotiated personnel adjustments, a 4% increase, as well as a step increase. And you will notice too that MIFRI does decrease slightly. It's a $900,000 decrease in fiscal 2022. This is anticipated to be a one-time decrease. There was available fund balances given to MIFRI from MEMSOF in prior budget years that had not been able to be spent down because of the impact of the coronavirus. And as a result, they had to delay their spring class into the summer, resulting in their inability to essentially use this funding on that class. If we look at the historical view of MEMSOF, we can see that between 2013 and 2017, there was a surplus in the annual funding. And this is associated with revenue enhancements that the General Assembly had enacted, an increase in the Motor Vehicle Administration's fees collected, as well as the crediting of the moving violation surcharge to MEMSOF. Beginning in 2018 and thereafter, we do see the return to running an annual deficit, mainly driven by personnel growth and the related expenditures there. In fiscal 2022 in Exhibit 4, we can see the impact of COVID-19 on the fund projection. This left-hand column here shows what DLS had projected the 2020 revenues to be in our analysis last year. And this middle chart here shows the actual revenues that were collected. And the biggest change here is a $5 million difference in the MVA registration fee. You may recall back in the spring when the pandemic was really at its peak, the MVA facilities had shut down. And so this loss in revenue here is associated with people not being able to register their cars and collect the fees that way. We also did see a decline in the moving violation surcharge. There's about a 25% decrease in the citations issued, again, associated with fewer drivers traveling during the pandemic. Looking forward to our annual fund projection, this graphic here compares the DBM assumptions and the DLS assumptions in our annual fund projections. The biggest probably difference here is that DBM is using a 3-year average rate of growth, while DLS is continuing to use our 10-year average rate of growth. The intent there trying to smooth out any one-time changes or one-time jumps in expenditures and revenues. MIFRE and MIMS, there's a slight percentage change again associated with the differences in the average growth rate. The EMS fund, we both have set to $15 million. Shock trauma, we do have a slight difference. DBM is reflecting the governor's intent to annually increase funding to shock trauma by $100,000 through fiscal 2023, while DLS has been reflecting this increase in actual years. We have not been reflecting it in out years to reflect the intent of the General Assembly. You will notice a significant percentage change between DBM and DLS's MS PAC projection. Again, this is based on the difference between the 3-year and 10-year average growth rates, as well as DLS including personal salary adjustments, again, largely driven by the SLEO negotiated personnel salary increases. And DLS also is reflecting the operating expenses that are based on DO-IT's cost estimates for the MIMS communication systems. So when we plot out our future growth, future expenditures and future revenues, we do see that there's a slight surplus in the 2022 allowance. This is associated with MDOT's projected increase in the revenues collected for the vehicle registration fee. They're projecting about a 10% increase year over year between 21 and 22. However, we are expecting revenues to drop and expenditures to increase beginning in 2023, so that we are running essentially a deficit each year moving forward. I will point out that the fund remains solvent through 2025. However, it does reach its insolvency point in 2025. And so we do suggest that the General Assembly begin to consider revenue enhancements and associated fee increases no later than the 2023 General Assembly session to address the pending insolvency date. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Konzelman. Are there any questions from any of the members of PSTE? Seeing none at this time, Mr. Chair, are there any members with questions with PSA?
No questions from the members of PSA, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. If we could bring up Mr. Clay Stamp, the chair, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator McCray and Delegate Haynes. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate you having me here today. On behalf of the board, I thank you. I also like to thank Mr. Konzelman for his detailed analysis. As you may know, we enjoy a model system of EMS care in the state of Maryland, built on the premise that we try to deliver the right patient to the right place in the right amount of time. I'm happy to report that our partnership between the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems, Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, MSP Aviation, Shock Trauma, and our Maryland State Firemen's Association remains strong. We work hard together throughout the year to ensure that we deliver the service that we try to deliver in Maryland. I'm happy to report that we were able to complete a EMS plan to take us to 2030, laying out a clear pathway forward to ensure that we're providing the best services possible. The EMS fund is a vital underpinning to our ability to perform the services we do in the state of Maryland. And we would look forward to working with you, both committees, in achieving a well-coordinated, efficient, effective system of care. Finally, I'd just like to recognize our teams, our doctors, our nurses, paramedics, all those that are part of the EMS system for being front and center in the fight against COVID. Right now, they're feeling the brunt of it, and they're doing an excellent job. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. They're out there on the front lines. And finally, I just want to share with you a demonstration of how our system works. Just several weeks ago, there was a tragedy over here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland involving a vehicle crash with multiple victims. And within minutes, we had 4 helicopters on the scene that delivered patients to 3 separate specialty care facilities within an hour in 2 different states, 3 Maryland State Police helicopters and a Delaware State Police helicopter, both volunteer and career EMS providers from 3 different counties, all there within minutes, delivering critical patients to definitive care in less than the golden hour. It's an expensive system. It's a good system. It saved lives. And the reason we have it, and we're all proud of it, is because of the work that you all do and in providing us the funds to carry it through. Mr. Chairman and Chairman, I yield the rest of my time to my partners that are here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman Stamp, I just want to make sure that I recognize your partners. I also want to be mindful of the time and that my colleagues over in the House of Delegates. So I'm going to acknowledge your partners, Ms. Snecker, Major Tagliaferri, and Mr. Delbridge. If there's any sense of urgency that you feel compelled to make some form of a statement, but I think that we're all in agreement in reference to the importance of this respective agency at this moment, if you all wanted to acknowledge. Okay. I'm gonna see if there's any questions from any. I see my Senator Edwards, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where are we in relation to, excuse me, pilots? Getting pilots for helicopters, particularly in the rural parts of the state. I'm mainly interested in one up in the mountains. I know at times you had a hard time getting pilots. How are we with that?
Good afternoon, Senator. It's Major Tagliaferri from the State Police. I'm pleased to say that we've done very well with hiring pilots. I can tell you right now, Trooper 5 out in Cumberland is fully operational. We currently have 8 pilots out there right now, and we also have 3 additional pilots that are in training right now. So I'm pleased to say that we are not having any issues with retaining and hiring pilots, and it's a continuing and ongoing process despite the COVID pandemic. But we've seen a stabilization in attrition with pilots leaving, and we're also seeing pilots looking for employment, and we've been very successful in hiring pilots.
Thank you very much, Major. It's good to hear that we're in better shape than we were several years ago. We had a hard time keeping the aircraft running because of lack of pilots. So it's great to hear that you're kind of ahead of the ball, so to speak. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Edwards, and thank you, Major, for commenting on it. I know that Senator Edwards has repeatedly talked about the importance of our folks, especially up in the mountains, and making sure that they get the same opportunities as all of the state of Maryland. Mr. Chair, is there any questions from members of the House?
No questions from the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I just want to repeat on behalf of all of us, we know the importance of MemSoft. We know we're thankful for all of you all's leadership and what you do for Marylanders across the state, and just thank you for your leadership. Mr. Kozelman, our policy analysis, just as we always do, we're very appreciative of your leadership and what you were able to put together. Thank you all. And at this moment, we'll move on to our briefing, which comes from the Police and Correctional Training Commission, and we would like to bring up our analyst, Jacob Cash.
Thank you, Chair. Today I'll be going over the Police and Correctional Training Commission's budget. They are 2 distinct and separate training commissions for the correctional staff of public safety and the police all across the state. the fiscal 2022 allowance is $10.6 million for PCTC, and that's about a 1.7% increase over the working appropriation. As you can see, the majority of spending goes towards personnel for the trainers and the administrative staff at PCTC. About a quarter of expenses go towards other operations at the facility and for training, as well as a $2 million police training fund. In terms of the budget change, there wasn't many changes. However, I'll point out at the bottom, there's a transportation grant from the federal government that supported transporting international students from BWI to PCTC. However, that's been removed from the budget. In terms of personnel, PCTC has about 70 positions allowed, and 9.5 of those are vacant as of the end of December. And that's about 2.5 positions above the turnover expectancy. You can see the vacancies here each month of the calendar year. And as you can see, they increased more in the fall in comparison, especially to the previous year. And the first thing that I want to talk about regarding the budget is the police training fund. On the cover page, that's that yellow bar there. In 2020, the actual spending was below the working appropriation because only a few items actually made it through procurement. That includes a training tank, for a water training tank of $200,000 and a task analysis study for entry-level police training. And in 2021, DPSES also plans to underspend the $2 million appropriation. The first chunk of the money would go towards the learning management system replacement. Now, that's a major IT development project for the department, and it will completely redo the system that PCTC uses to track coursework, student attendance, as well as officer certifications, and a lot of other data tasks for the department, for the commissions, excuse me. And there's also spending planned for buying SUVs, which they currently don't have at the driver training track, and a future task analysis study that they'll encumber funds for. And in the allowance year, they're planning to use this funding mostly on the learning management system replacement, about $750,000, as well as for driver training simulators, which would allow the department to utilize their space better. And talking about classroom utilization, we received more information from the department this year in a JCR response. This exhibit shows the number of training events divided by who taught them. And just over 50% of training events were taught by PCTC or other DPSES staff. That means about half of training classes are not conducted at all by public safety staff. They're conducted by the client agency or other state government officials. In terms of the training days for fiscal 2020, they went down slightly, mostly for non-state employees. However, when we look at the utilization rates for training rooms, we can see where those training days are occurring. Mostly they're occurring in skill areas, which are 92% booked for 2020. Now, those driver training simulators I mentioned earlier will help to even out the amount of time that students are spending in the skill areas versus the labs and simulators, so that PCTC won't have such backlogs for the driving track, as well as some of the other issues getting trainee days accomplished in a quick time frame. But as I mentioned earlier, there's really not much going on with this budget. There aren't many changes, and the recommendation from DLS is to concur with the governance allowance. So unless there's any other questions, that completes my presentation.
Thank you. 2 quick questions, Mr. Cash. One of them is, could you give examples of the contractual positions? I was just curious when I was reading the agency report.
I'm actually not sure what they would be used for in this specific budget, but they can range from anything like housekeeping staff to, fiscal help if they need it, in terms of this actual agency, they may know what those positions are used for better than I can say that there are about 20 contractual positions allowed in the budget, but typically they only use about 10 of those any given year.
Thank you. Now that's helpful. And I'll also ask the agency to give me a couple examples. Last question, page 11. This is just something to ask for the agency for. I think that you have the information maybe. This gives the fiscal 2020 outlook, and I just wanted to see the whole picture. So if you can give me 2 previous years, I think that this may do it injustice because it just kind of looks at it from a COVID standpoint.
For the training room utilization?
Exactly, the utilization room. Yep.
I'm not sure if that information is available. This was the first year they provided it. It was in the JCR response.
Mm-hmm.
I can definitely talk to the agency, see if they have any past information, especially probably the skill areas. They'll have more information, but that's certainly something that we can see and get back to you on.
I truly appreciate it. I'm going to now move and see if there are any questions from any of the members from PSTE. Seeing none, Mr. Chair, just want to see if there are any questions from any members of PSA.
There are no questions from PSA, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to bring up, it looked like we have Secretary Green on the Zoom call, and if you can bring up your team too, Secretary Green.
Very good, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman McCray, Chairman Haynes, Vice Chair Proctor, members of the Senate Public Safety, Transportation, and Environmental Subcommittee, and members of the House Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Robert Green. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today virtually is Chief of Staff Rachel Sessa, and also Ms. Jane Sachs, who is the Director of Correctional Training. Mr. Liebno, our Executive Director, was unable to join us today. The department appreciates its ongoing collaboration with the Department of Legislative Services, and always we appreciate Mr. Cash's hard work and thoughtful analysis. In the analysis, the Department of Legislative Services asked the department to respond to one issue. You should have our written testimony before you. I will keep my remarks brief and on topic. Before I address the issue we were asked to respond to, I would like to express my gratitude to the entire team at the Department of Public Safety, Education, and Training Center. As with every unit across the department, the Training Center was and has been and will continue to be significantly impacted by the ongoing pandemic. The department has kept its foot on the pedal in terms of recruitment and hiring, which means the Training Center had to ramp up the number of academies at any one time we were able to do, and large classroom settings were no longer conducive to the necessary social distancing protocols. But as always, safety took precedence. The Training Center transitioned the first part of the academy training into a self-study online component. We decreased the number of candidates in each class, and we went from running 1 academy a day to holding 3 academies per day at our Sykesville location, one from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., one from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and another from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. We conducted a total of 11 correctional academies at the Sykesville location. The department also ran 5 academies in Hagerstown at the Hagerstown Community College, totaling 90 individuals. And we partnered with Warwick Community College, who ran 3 academies last year and conducted mandated training for 51 individuals. Of course, as a result of the pandemic, we absolutely deployed mandatory PPE in every classroom, testing protocols, social distancing, enhanced cleaning protocols, all of those things to keep this high contact environment clean and free of COVID-19. These adjustments enabled the department to keep moving new employees who required training, police and corrections through the process. 491 new correctional officers that were hired in 2020 received their requisite academy training. Again, just to take a moment to acknowledge these tremendous efforts in extraordinary times, and it speaks to that very utilization of the facilities. With regards to the DLS analysis, DLS asked the department to comment on the projected funds, the Police Training Standards Commission Training Fund. The Maryland Police Training Standards Commission Fund receives $2 million each year from court fees, which are collected throughout the fiscal year. Although the budget document reflects the $2 million being received each fiscal year since FY 2019, The funds are not actually allocated to the Police and Correctional Training Commission's budget till the end of the fiscal year, typically late June or early July. And that's just for notation of how the money moves. Expenditures from this fund cannot be allocated until they are transferred into that budget. Therefore, $4 million is currently allocated, and the additional funds for FY 2021 will not be available until the end of that fiscal year 2021 or the beginning of FY 2022. In FY 2020, the Police Training Standards Commission elected to spend their funds on the following: the job task analysis, which was noted by Mr. Cash, as well as the renovations to that training tank, which is a water rescue, submersible rescue environment for police to utilize and have available to them year round. That renovation cost $250,000. So far in fiscal year 2021, the Police Training and Standards Commission spent approximately $105,000. We have received those SUVs. There are 9 of them. We deploy used SUVs. Many police agencies across the state use an SUV training vehicle. So this allows us to align that training fleet with the same type of vehicle officers are using on the street. They also used the funds to purchase the cleaning and purifying units that, quite frankly, allowed us to continue to actively and safely use our classroom areas, as well as an expansion of the rave system at $8,600 for an on-site emergency alert system. $500,000 will be spent in fiscal year 2021 on the additional purifiers we want to place in skills areas across the facilities. And again, a portion of that is estimated to go to the initial award of the LMS. The department's in the process of procuring the new learning management system as we speak for the commission. It's projected that that learning management system will be awarded in FY 2021, and the initial down payment will be made to the approved vendor. The request proposals were advertised in late 2020 with bids due mid this month. Review and evaluation of the proposals is planned for the very upcoming weeks. The range of bids for the initial service to include equipment, installation, transfer of data, training, and backup is between $2 and $3 million. The commission is also considering using funds, as noted, to purchase the driver training simulators to address some deferred construction projects for the enhancement in some of our skills training areas, such as the scenario-based training facility. With that, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurs. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our testimony. We are happy to answer any questions the committees may have. I'm sorry, Senator McCray, I can't hear you.
Unmute.
Perfect. Got it. Unmute. The mute. Mr. Secretary, I was asking the question in reference to what I asked policy analyst, Mr. Jacob Cash, in reference to the contractual positions. Could you give an example of what a contractual position is? Maybe 2 or 3?
Certainly, and joining us today is Ms. Jane Sachs, and I'd ask Ms. Sachs to speak specifically to them around the topic areas and how they're utilized at the Academy. Ms. Sachs?
Good afternoon.
Excuse me one second. Chairman McCray, if I can interject one quick question before she answers, do you have an objection to that?
Please, no problem
Okay.
at all. Please.
I just want to ask the secretary, I understand that this commission is all special funds, and that DLS recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. If in the interest of time, the Subcommittee on Public Safety and Administration has any follow-up questions that can't be answered during this particular hearing, would you and your staff be available to answer those questions independently?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman,
okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Go right ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Could you just give examples of the 2 or 3 contractual positions?
Sure. We often use the contractual positions for specific instructors on a certain topic area that we don't have staff that are knowledgeable or really subject matter experts in that area. Some of them are clerical positions, and we have actually, I think we have one that's a housekeeper, like you mentioned.
Got it.
answer your question.
Yes, ma'am. In reference to the question that I asked the policy analysis, Mr. Cash, on page 11, do you all have data from previous years outside of what you supplied from April and May of 2020 with the utilization?
Mr. Chairman, if I may take that question, Secretary Green and Director Sachs. And Chairman, thank you so much for that question. So during the last fiscal year, as a part of the Joint Chairman's report, the budget subcommittees and the budget committees asked us to begin tracking and reporting on that information. So that was commenced during the prior fiscal year, and we have been continuing to collect it ever since the submission of the Joint Chairman's report. But unfortunately, we do not have the same data for prior years.
Okay, so it would be accurate to state that you all started keeping track April 2020?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, perfect.
If I could add a comment on that chart, I would just mention that the chart represents all of fiscal 2020, so it would be starting in July of 2019. But there was additional information in the report that April and May is referring to that indicate a sharp dip in usage. So the report would show that dip, while this exhibit does not, if that makes sense.
Got it. I'll connect offline and get a better understanding of the utilization rate. Last question. From the analysis report on page, I guess, 8, obviously there's 3.8 million still in the fund. I think because the bullet points run into that point, it could be interpreted that is how you're spending the 3.8. What is that accurate? And if not, could you just give clarity to what would that 3.8 million that's currently sitting in that fund be utilized for?
I believe it's inclusive of the items that we noted out of that 3.8, Chairman McCray.
Got it. So it would be concurrent with the bullet points that's right underneath of it. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yes, sir. And we'll confirm that for you and give you a fund balance.
Got it. Okay. And it looked like I was doing a quick run of it. It looked like it's about $1 million. It almost looked like maybe 2.5 million. So I'm going to ask further questions offline, just in reference to understanding how the 3.8 is going to be allocated or spent, especially because we're putting more money into it in this respective budget into the fund. So I'm going to see if there are any questions from any of the members from PSTE at the moment. Seeing none, I'm going to move to Mr. Chair. Is there any members from PSA that may have questions?
No questions from the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee.
Perfect. Well, Secretary Green, just want to acknowledge that always enjoy the conversation. Like I said, I think that you're doing a phenomenal job over there at Public Safety. And I know that that's not just because of yourself, but it's also the team that you have on the line at this moment. Mr. Cash, I just wanted to also say thank you for your service to all Marylanders and your due diligence and making sure that we have a good analyst report. I'm going to swing over to Chairman Haynes just to see if he have any final comments before we wrap up this briefing today. And you're on mute. You did what I did, Chair.
I have one comment that I just want to make very briefly, and that is I wanted to recognize from our previous hearing, which I failed to do so with our vice chair, who was once a member of Public Safety Administration, was making his rounds on our joint committees on last Friday, and I wanted to give him a great shout out as well. And with that, I have no further comments or questions on behalf of Public Safety and Administration. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And this ends the hearing for PSTE and PSA. And hope you all have a blessed day. Thanks again.